This is Work University, episode 31. This is Work University, and I'm Annalisa Felix. This is where I interview people from various employment backgrounds and get the inside scoop on what their job is really like. If you're just getting into the workforce, or if you're curious about getting into something new, listen up.
Hello, today I am talking with Mike Tockstein, who is a Pyrotechnician here in Los Angeles. Hello, Mike.
How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Hey, let's talk about your job. It sounds so interesting. You're a Pyrotechnician. What does that mean in general to somebody who really doesn't know what that means on a day-to-day basis? What do you do?
So a Pyrotechnician is responsible for the safe and successful setup and execution of a professional fireworks display. So that responsibility includes everything from doing all the legal paperwork when you pick up your show. I'll explain what that means. And transport it to the show site. You're in charge of a crew of what can be all unlicensed apprentices or technicians. And you as the licensee in charge of this setup are both directing the setup, ensuring the crew's safety, ensuring that it's going to be safe for the audience, and that it's a successful show for the sponsoring customer.
Okay, so when you say customer, that could be a range of, say, 20 people to thousands of people, right?
So the customer themselves would be a specific person or organization or entity. So it could be a local city jurisdiction. It could be a wedding planner. It could be, somebody within a corporation, that's going to be hosting a special corporate event.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the person that actually purchases the fireworks display. The audience would cover the potential, tens of thousands of people.
So, say a wedding, would that be a smaller type of explosive than, say, 4th of July, or are they the same?
So they're all really the same type of fireworks. You can have varying size shows, so the number of fireworks can change. Really, there's two things that go into dictating the size of the actual fireworks. One, it could be somewhat related to the budget from the customer, but two, it's much more related to the amount of size and physical space you have to work with at your firing site. So the rules stipulate that you need to have at minimum 70 feet per inch of shell that you are shooting from your firing sites to the audience. So, for example, if you're shooting a 3-inch diameter aerial shell, which is typically the smallest diameter shell that we would use at a professional display, you need at least 210 feet from your firing site to where your audience is. And the shell size, as it goes up, you can put more intricate effects and whatnot. You can see them from much farther away. They go much higher, but you have to have space. So we use shells ranging from 3-inch all the way up to 10-inch typically at a show. And there could be special circumstances where you could use even larger than that, 12-inch, 16-inch. And as you can imagine, you need a tremendous amount of space based on having that 70 feet per inch of rule. So you typically won't see those much larger shells unless you're, shooting at more of a desert location, or you're out on a barge shooting off, the coast of some party or event of that nature.
Right. So let me get back to you wearing your management hat. You mentioned licensing. Now, what goes into licensing, and is that like an annual license you have to keep certifying every year or so, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the licensing scheme really differs from state to state. There's some states that don't require a professional license, and it's more, working with the local jurisdiction that you're in. But in the state that I live and work in California, considering it's one of the most heavily regulated states in the nation, licensing requirements are fairly stringent. You have to go through quite a process to get your what's called a basic commercial license in California. You have to apprentice on a minimum of 8 public fireworks displays, so the sort of displays you see on the 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to get 5 written letters of recommendation from licensed pyrotechnicians that have been licensed for at least a year or more.
Mm-hmm.
To submit an application to the state fire marshal's office. They will then process your application, do background check. Of course, you're sending them some money along with that application. And if you pass all of that, then you qualify for the written exam. And the written exam covers mainly your knowledge of the legalities and the rules and regulations of shooting professional fireworks in California. And once you pass that, then they send you your operator's license.
Okay, so if you get a job and you hire some apprentices, some of them may or may not be licenses, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so that just gives them experience, but that also gives you help for your show. So it sounds like it's a win-win all around with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been done like that for generations. And, one thing about working in fireworks is it's one of those jobs that is a job of passion. It's a tremendous amount of hard physical labor, moving, heavy mortar racks around, and, you really have to enjoy what you're doing in order to enjoy the experience working behind the scenes at a fireworks display. It's something you have to go into already being passionate about. Like, I really want to do fireworks. I live for the roar of the crowd, and you're going to put in that full day or more worth of real hard manual labor, swinging hammers and moving equipment around to get to that end goal. So it's definitely something that most of us have enjoyed since we were kids, and turned it into a hobby or a part-time job, doing professional fireworks as we became old enough to become licensed.
Right, and I would guess that being an apprentice for a certain number of jobs before you get your license would either tell you, yay, I do like this, or hey, maybe this wasn't something I thought I would like, and then they can kind of move on. I mean, it sounds like that kind of experience. Did that ever happen?
Oh, absolutely. You learn the first show. It doesn't take the 8 shows to learn whether or not it's something for you. I've had people that show up and don't even finish the first day. Once they realize what's actually involved, like, okay, this is not what I had in mind. This wasn't what I was thinking it was. Because you're out there working. You're outside. You're in the sun. We're not setting up underneath trees, so you're out in the full sun the whole time. And for something like a 4th of July display, which tend to be substantial in size, we're offloading 15,000 pounds worth of equipment from a truck. We're setting up a couple thousand pounds worth of explosives, loading, wiring, and then you have to repeat that in reverse order at the end of the night after you successfully fire your display. We do dead sweeps and blow up all our cables and pull all the nails and throw all heavy racks, all that 15,000 pounds worth of equipment loaded back up onto the truck. So it's a lot of work, and you definitely learn whether or not it's for you your first time out.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting that you painted a picture of what the entire job looks like, because as a spectator, we don't see all that. We don't even, honestly, I don't think about that. I don't think about what the schematics look for, where to set what piece where, staples, you say, having to clean up afterwards, because after everybody leaves, I'm sure you're still there cleaning up, right?
Oh, absolutely. It will typically take us hours, depending on the show size. Our typical 4th of July display is likely going to take you a number of hours once the show has fired to strike the show, clean everything up, put everything back on the truck. And then you still have to take the truck back to the plant, finish your paperwork. So it's a much longer night. There's a lot that go into actually producing a large professional fireworks display. In addition to the manual labor, there's also the choreography of the display. Is is it a show that's choreographed to music? 4th of July is a good example. A lot of shows are choreographed to patriotic music and top 40 songs into that 15, 20-minute display that you see in most jurisdictions. So that choreography takes a lot of time by the show producer, the creating of the layout maps based on that choreography, and then disseminating that information to your crew, coming up with your plan, and making sure it gets set up per that choreography and executed as designed.
Right. So when you're contracting all of your people and equipment for this job or a job, do you also have to make sure the fire department is close by, or how does that work? Do they have people that need to be on hand for all shows?
Yes. So in the state of California, you're essentially required to have a local jurisdiction fire inspector there. And depending on the jurisdiction, they have their own independent requirements. Some jurisdictions require above and beyond the 70 feet per inch rule that's followed as a national standard. They require 100 feet per inch of shell. So that may limit the caliber of shell that you could use at a particular show site in those jurisdictions. Wow. Some of them require that they're there when you arrive and you open back your truck. Some, don't come out until you're, well through your setup or even completed your setup and do an inspection of the sites afterwards. But most jurisdictions require a permit. So you're having to pull a permit with the fire department. And when you do that, you're submitting your plot plan, which is basically, I'm setting up right here's the satellite photo. I'm setting up right here. Here are the distances to the audience based on the shells that I'm shooting, that I have, et cetera. And then the fire department will issue that permit based on, yes, okay, this is a valid and safe plan. And then the inspector will come out and verify things on show.
Wow. Yeah, so it sounds like there's so much that goes into it, because if I wanted to do a certain show on a certain date, I would need to plan out in enough time to hire you to get the job done, permits, all of that, right? Like, say, how far out would I need to schedule a show?
During the off season, I would say 2 to 3 weeks at a minimum, considering, you're having to apply for the permits. A lot of times if it's a new venue that you haven't shot at before, that involves physically driving out there and walking the grounds to make sure there's, something that the satellite photos don't show. You're having to pack the show, so that involves renting the truck. Most shows are packed into rental trucks. And, once the show's packed, you're choreographing the show first, then you're packing the show, you're hiring the operator's getting his crew together and disseminating the layouts and the choreography, and then the actual show day. So there's just a tremendous amount of coordination, both the person who purchased the display, the person who owns the property that you're shooting on, which is usually not one and the same, the groundskeepers making sure sprinklers are turned off, your audio technician if it's a choreographed show to a musical soundtrack. There's just a tremendous amount of production coordination that goes into executing a display like that. So it does take at least the recommended 2 to 3 weeks at minimum. 4th of July, months. There's so many shows happening within a span of a few days that the amount of the logistical complexities that go along with all of those things I just mentioned, now multiply that by a couple hundred on a single day. As you can imagine, you need a lot of time to coordinate all of that.
Wow. So your company, Pyro Innovations, so would you then be responsible for, say, multiple shows happening at one time, and then you have to just send your teams out to do their thing?
So Pyro Innovations is actually unique within the fireworks industry. We ourselves are not a display company. I subcontract to display companies who actually sell the fireworks displays. So there's a number of big companies within the California and throughout the country that have the importing permits, the display permits and licensing, the insurance and all of that for a show. They will hire a contractor like myself, who's a licensed pyrotechnician, to actually set up and fire the display. Renovations is actually a training and recruiting company, or the largest training and recruiting company in regards to professional fireworks technicians in the country. And our main role is to provide a channel for people that are interested in getting into the professional fireworks world, to have that avenue and access that really wasn't available in the past. Being
right.
You have to apprentice on a licensed crew, so you really had to know somebody in the past. So Renovations now provides that avenue to really streamline that process and make it much easier to jump into the industry. So, and on top of that, we produce a tremendous amount of training material. Not only do we do training out in the field, but we've produced an extraordinary online training program that goes through all the ins and outs of what you need to know before you're working your first show, the equipment, the tooling, clothing, how to do some of the more basic functions at a show, such as loading a traditional aerial shell, and how to strain release the wire, how to orient a multi-shot cake device, things like that that are, kind of foundational, so that when you show up on that crew to apprentice, the licensed operator who's there to, both run a safe setup, but also a successfully execute a show,
right,
a lot on his plate, and he's talking with the customer and the fire inspector, and he can't necessarily babysit you the whole time. He usually has other senior folks that, can play that role as well. But being able to send somebody out into the field with a plethora of, foundational knowledge before they get there, immensely helpful, especially, considering we're dealing with explosives. So that's
right.
the two main functions that Renovations serves, and how it differentiates itself between a normal display company.
Does your business also deal with, say, the movie studios and those kind of pyro jobs as well, or is it just for fireworks?
So I'll answer that by saying there's four main license categories in the state of California. One is called basic commercial, which is for the big fireworks displays that you see on the 4th of July. That could include using those fireworks for all different sorts of events, like I mentioned previously, throughout the year. So homecomings, graduations, New Year's, sporting events, etc. And that's one license to do that. A different license would be what's called a theatrical license. That allows you to do close proximity effects, such as concerts, so you're doing the pyro in front of the band on stage, and indoor, outdoor, those sort of things. Amusement parks, where you may have pyrotechnics that are very close to an actor doing a stunt show. That would fall under a theatrical license. Then you have special effects, which is the license required to do the sort of things you see in the movies. And each one of those is really a different path. And then the fourth one, which is more or less in the hobby world, is a rocketry license. So that allows you to do high-power rocket motors, and that are above and beyond what you can commercially purchase at your local hobby store. So those are four completely different paths. Most display companies do just that. They do the big fireworks displays. They do dabble in some of the theatrical side as well. But being that those are two totally different worlds and require two totally different licensing paths, that's not necessarily always something that a single company may dabble in multiple. Special effects, that's their own world. That's a different licensing path, a different set of technicians you're working with, different logistics. It's the differences are fairly dramatic, and there's almost no overlap.
What is the dangers that are involved?
Well, I mean, we won't sugarcoat it. I mean, you're dealing with explosives. But I'll point out that an overwhelming majority of the accidents that you hear about having to do with fireworks on, say, the 4th of July are all from average Joe playing with consumer fireworks. If you consider the fact that the fireworks that we use are highly regulated, if you consider the fact that our crews go through a tremendous amount of training, both before they show up out on the show site, like I mentioned, and a tremendous amount of hands-on training before you're allowed to even apply for a license. It's rare that there's an accident on a professional fireworks site. Now, I'll differentiate between an accident and just some anomalous events, such as what we call a low break, or you get a gun detonation. Well, those sort of things happen all the time. A dud, a misfire. They're explosives. They can be somewhat unpredictable at times. But because of our training, because of the safety gear we're wearing, because of the distances we're keeping ourselves from those mortars when they're firing, we get a low break. The crowd goes ooh ah, we go ooh ah even more, and you fire the next shot. It's very safe in the way that we handle the setup and the execution of the show, and that's why it's very, very rare to have an accident at a show site. If you do, it's probably because you weren't following protocol and or you just weren't using common sense.
Right. Mike, what advice would you give to somebody who wants to consider this as a career?
Well, I will start by saying that pyrotechnics in general, speaking about display fireworks specifically, is not something that most people can turn into a career. As you know, fireworks displays, even though there are displays that take place throughout the year, they are still very seasonal. It's not something you would typically be able to support yourself on exclusively. Most pyrotechnicians all have regular 9-to-5 jobs, and there's some pyrotechnicians that only shoot one show a year, the 4th of July. There's some that do shows every opportunity that's presented to them. And the only handful of folks that do pyrotechnics full time are typically those who are the sales reps for a company, who also typically double as the show producer. So they sell the show, they produce the show, meaning they choreograph it and whatnot. So there's really only if you consider. If you say, company A does 500 shows on the 4th of July, well, that's going to require 500 pyrotechnicians who are licensed to execute those displays. And within that, there's probably, only 40 full-time employees. So those 40 people can turn that into a career. The other 500 are really just doing it as a passionate side job or hobby. So it's not something you can typically support yourself on. You're doing it out of passion. We love what we do. But if you're wanting to get into it, depending on what state you're in, if you're in California or Washington, Idaho, I can set people up in those areas as well. But if you're in California, you can reach out to us on pyrorenovations.com, and you go and you click on the Become Crew page, or become a pyrotechnician, and it'll kind of take you through what a day in the life is like, going over a lot of the things you and I talked about today. Make sure that they're kind of aware of what they're getting themselves into, because we do want to avoid, I show up, nope, this definitely isn't for me, and then I leave. So that's another reason why I have a ton of pictures and videos and whatnot of what goes on behind the scenes on both my website, our social media pages, and YouTube channel, so that you kind of get that idea of what you're getting yourself into. So you fill that form out, and as I mentioned before, that one of the sole reasons Pyro Renovations exists is to help create that avenue for people to get into the industry, and I can get you started almost immediately, depending on what season we're in the professional fireworks world, apprenticing on a crew.
Okay, great. So can you tell me again where can we reach you if we want to get in touch with you and all your social media handles?
Sure. So pyroinnovations.com. That's Pyro Innovations with an S. Is our main website. We're on Facebook, just at Pyro Innovations, Instagram at pyro.innovations. And then you can just look up Pyro Innovations on YouTube, and we have a ton of great videos, including a lot of our training videos where you can actually see the videos. All of our training material is free. That's another good point. You can go on and learn how the professionals set up fireworks.
Mike, thank you so much for giving us a glimpse of what it is to be a pyrotechnician. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I hope you liked this episode. If you have a particular job you'd like me to look into, send me an email at workuniversityforyou@gmail.com. That's workuniversity, the number 4, the letter U, @gmail.com.